Welcome back, Unexplained Ones, to All Things Unexplained, where we delve into the mysteries that challenge our understanding. I'm Dr. Mounce, and you're listening to Part 3 of our special series on the UAP Disclosure Fund's Congressional Briefing. In Part 1, we explored Dr. Eric Davis's startling testimony about the 1947 Roswell incident. He revealed that a craft had crashed and its occupants, 4-foot-tall grays, were recovered. Davis also disclosed the existence of other non-human species, reptilians, insectoids, and Nordics, commonly known as tall whites.
Like, what was their size and how many are usually on a craft?
They're typically the multiple species. People really like the grays, the Nordics. People have talked about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian or insectoid, it's that they resemble to the recipient of reptile or insect type humanoid, because they have this a head and 4 limbs and torso.
So large, small,
human size, human scale.
and are there how many are a crew?
Well, the grays I'm familiar with from investigating the crash at Corona, which is misnamed the crash at Roswell. It's not the crash at Roswell, it's the crash at Brogan in Mexico. Those were grays, those were cool. And the Nordics are typically human size, probably, I've heard 5-6 people. And same with the people who mislabel reptilian and insectoid, they're roughly that height too. I haven't heard anything about anything 7 or 8 feet.
Part 2 brought us a controversial photograph presented by Lue Elizondo. It was presented as a compelling image labeled FL210 near 4 corners, possibly showing a disc-shaped object casting a shadow over rugged terrain. However, within hours, researchers on UFO Twitter proved the image to be nothing more than irrigation circles.
And they shared with you a photograph that has never been made public. It was taken in 2021 over the Four Corners region at an altitude of approximately 21,000 feet by a private pilot outside of his aircraft. And this is a photo. I'll give a copy for Congress to see. It was taken by we have all the information on the camera, and I just received permission today to share this with you. It is a lenticular object, and when you look at the shadow being cast, it is significantly large. This is an altitude of 21,000 feet. Taken by a civilian pilot.
This revelation was followed by significant changes within the UAP Disclosure Fund. Christopher Mellon stepped in as the new board chairman, while Elizondo and Dr. Gary Nolan departed. Notably, Dr. Eric Davis joined the advisory board, bringing his expertise in advanced propulsion and his background with ALSAP and ATIP. Now in Part 3, we see the return of Mike Gold, former NASA Associate Administrator and member of NASA's UAP Independent Study Team. Mike Gold previously appeared at the November 13, 2024 congressional hearing titled Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Exposing the Truth. Part 3 also has Dr. Anna Brady-Estevez, founding partner at American Deep Tech and former SBA Innovation Advisor. Their insights shed light on the ongoing efforts to understand and address UAP phenomenon. A reminder that the audio during this briefing was very low quality. We've done our best to enhance it for you, so please be patient. Stay with us now as we unpack the testimonies and implications from this pivotal hearing.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic threw their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah.
All Things Unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, will save for closed session.
If you're watching on YouTube or X, say hello. Let me know you're here. I appreciate you.
Anybody who's standing up, please take your seats unless you are part of the community. So first, folks, let me first extend my sincere appreciation and thanks for everyone's patience. As you can see, we could probably stay all day with just one panelist alone. Lots to discuss. We are barely scratching the surface here. The next discussion is really going to be part of a scientific discussion. And so the two panelists you have here are experts in their own fields and recognized as a global leader in their particular expertise. So what I'd like to do first is introduce Ms. Anna Brady-Estevez, founding partner at American Deep Tech, former SBA Innovation Advisor for Kaufman Fellow, and on the UAPDF Advisory Board. But what you may not know is that Ms. Brady-Estevez is deeply involved with the National Science Foundation. And that involvement really includes looking at pioneering new ways to invest American talent, scientific talent, into new and emerging areas of science. Right? Where do we decide to put our money and our effort in the next 20 years? Right? Where do we get that return on investment? What does that look like? Right? And how do we force ourselves to think outside of the box to be creative? Don't invent tomorrow's technology. Invent the technology after tomorrow. Right? And it's that type of creative thinking that has traditionally kept this country ahead of everybody else. And I ask you to, when she speaks, listen to what she has to say, because this is, in my opinion, this is the future. Not just this topic, but any topic requiring innovation. If you don't innovate, you stagnate. If you don't stagnate, you perish. That's just the bottom line, right? We live in a competitive world. The next individual is a colleague and friend of mine, Mr. Mike Gold. Mr. Mike Gold is president of the Civil and International Space at Redwire, member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, former NASA Associate Administrator for Space Policy and Partnerships, former Acting Associate Administrator for the Office of International and Interagency Relations and Senior Advisor to the Administrator for International and Legal Affairs, former Vice President for Civil Space at Maxwell Technologies, former Director of DC Operations and Business Growth at Bigelow Aerospace. You might remember that word from somewhere else, and that involvement. And last but certainly not least, as a member of NASA, am I correct to say a mission manager with the Artemis team? Did I get that right? I've got two things wrong so far today, so I want to make sure you're right.
I'm a recovering attorney. They wouldn't let me close the prior mission. So I was the architect of the Artemis Accords, however, the global partnership with 54 countries to explore the moon, Mars, and beyond.
Excellent. And that's it, right? explore moon, Mars, and beyond. There is something for you to consider. There was an estimate done that the future of mankind, our species, is not here. In fact, if you were to look at the financial opportunities, it was estimated that 1 times 10 to the 18th power amount of money this world has ever made globally in all its time as modern civilization. Multiply that by a factor of 18, and that's the value of the resources that lie within the inner asteroid belt of our solar system, right? So the future is there. As a microbiologist and immunologist, there's one primary directive of all life systems that we know, and that's to expand. If you don't expand, you will perish. In fact, you can look at a petri dish, and if you put the right amount of nutrients, bacteria will do the same. Take a plant, give it nutrients and water, it will grow and take over. That is the primary directive of all life, and we are no exception to that. So keep that in mind as these two individuals are going to talk to you about the importance of this topic, the UAP topic, and how it relates to the scientific community. Am I mistaken that you have a presentation for us? So what I'd like to do is turn it over. First of all, welcome our two guests, our esteemed guests. And do you have a presentation, or are you going to do the just questions and answers?
I'll go verbal, yeah.
Okay, verbal, got it. Mike, come on up and let's get you started.
Thanks so much. Is it okay if I go from here? Yeah, great. Sure. In terms of expansion, I can tell you my doctor says I'm expanding far too much every day.
Yeah, me too. I'm in the same boat.
A lot of trouble. Thank you so much, Lou, not only for today, but for all you have done to push this topic. You are an American hero, as well as the congressman and many others in this room, from the journalists to the scientists, to the advocates, to the pilots. It's just an honor to be here. I appreciate what everyone has done. Also, thank you, Redwater Board of Directors, for letting me out of the meeting early. That was a wonderful discussion. I think this is going to be a lot more exciting. If I could point you to my opening slide, that is actually an image taken by the Blue Ghost lunar lander with Redwire Argus cameras. I'm going to get in why that is such an extraordinary image in a moment. But before we get there, we were having a discussion about substances and what these new substances look like, new materials, what this UAP technology would be. And I've been given the challenging, if not an enviable task of saying, how could UAP technology impact innovation without knowing quite what that UAP technology is, even fundamentally? So what I'd like to try and do today is give you an example of how microgravity is impacting innovation in really almost every industrial field, and how that could be transformative. I don't know if extraterrestrial civilizations are using this. I think they likely would be, but I think this is an example of how a fundamental shift in technology can change everything. Our company, Redwire, has been conducting experiments on the International Space Station, on the space shuttle, for literally decades. We've flown hundreds of experiments over the past 35 plus years. We have 11 experiments active on the International Space Station right now, more than any other company. You see Senator John Glenn running one of our experiments there. The first one I'd like to show you is the biofabrication facility, the BFF. We're great at acronyms at Redwire. If you can play the video, please. This is, by the way, an over 400-pound payload. It broke the table at our facility in Greenville, Indiana. Much easier to handle in orbit. That astronaut, a Cubs fan, working very quickly, like coffee, 20 times speed, but he's installing what is a biofabrication unit. And that system has allowed us to manufacture human tissue in space. It resulted in the first human meniscus being printed in space. Who needs a meniscus? No idea. Probably use two, right? Exactly. This is the impact of microgravity. If you tried to create that meniscus on Earth, and again, I'm a recovering attorney, so I'm going to put it simply, it squishes. You couldn't do that in a gravity environment. It's not space per se. It's the lack of gravity that allows you to do these incredible things. Subsequent to the success we had with the meniscus, we printed live cardiovascular tissue. And we brought it back from the International Space Station, still live. Think what this could mean for people suffering from heart disease, the creation of heart patches. And of course, the goal of all of this is ultimately to create whole organs in space. How many of us have had friends and relatives die while waiting on an organ donation list? This could change all of that. Additionally, because we would be using your own stem cells to create the tissue, the organs, we would avoid the dangerous and expensive anti-rejection therapies that you go through. So we see how microgravity could have a dramatic impact in terms of life sciences. Also, pharmaceuticals. Redwire has flown 28 pillboxes. These are systems where we take pharmaceuticals, drugs, fly the seed crystals. And seed crystals, by the way, they're like a sourdough starting kit. They're what the drugs are made out of. And when you create seed crystals in microgravity, they're larger, more uniform, and that results in drugs with better efficacy, better longevity, fewer side effects. Here's an example that is very near and dear to my heart, insulin. We partnered with Eli Lilly, we flew insulin. Over on the left side of that, that's what insulin seed crystals look like when you create them on Earth. Over on the right side, that's what insulin looks like in space, the seed crystals. Again, I got a B- in biology as a high school student. Even I can tell the difference between one and the other. And because of those larger, more uniform crystals, you could have a version of insulin. We've seen versions of cancer treatment drugs that, whereas you have to go through chemotherapy that would be injected, again, long, painful, you could potentially get to a version of the drug where it could be administered orally. So a tremendous difference here relative to the pharmaceutical sector. And by the way, it's not just us who know this, is China. And the Chinese have their space station, they're going after the same research. So, Congressman, I would invite us to look at the International Space Station, replacing it with a commercial space station. This revolution with biotech and microgravity is going to happen. The only question, is it going to happen here in America, the free world, or is it going to be happening in China? And I do not want to be buying my next generation of pharmaceuticals, drugs from the Chinese. So we need to continue to support this, create new developments, but this is just life sciences and biotech. Again, micrograv will impact semiconductors, the same principles. When you form crystals in space, you can create new types of semiconductors that are more powerful, more tolerant of heat. Agriculture, you can create seeds, new types of plants that can flourish in the desert. We have a greenhouse that we're flying in space. Looking at many of that efforts, you see that there. We also have systems for what's called Z-WAN fiber, where it's a new type of fiber optic that can be incredibly more powerful. Again, every aspect of our technological society could be changed by this innovation. Is this something that UAP are using? Is this new substances that they're using? I don't know, perhaps. But you see how this field will revolutionize everything. And I believe in the future, the leaders in microgravity will not only be the leaders in economics, but in national security as well. As a matter of fact, that meniscus sprint, the customer for that was the Uniformed Services University, because the number one injury to our men and women in uniform are meniscus tears. Now I'd like to talk about who wants to see some unclassified data, right? Let's talk about some imagery that we're getting from NASA. As Lou mentioned, I was proud to be a member of NASA's UAP independent study team. We had some very common sense recommendations, one of which that I testified here in the House not too long ago, alongside Lue Elizondo and others, was that we need to go into the NASA archives, get the imagery, review it, make it public, and look at what we've got. This is an example that hit the internet not too long ago. Is it a Tic Tac? It's on Mars? I don't know. I'm not qualified to say, but someone should be looking at it, and we should be collecting and collating the data. Here's one that's even more interesting to me. Lunar horizon glow. This is a phenomenon that we first saw with the surveyor systems. This is named a glow that we're seeing on the horizon of the moon. We saw it with the robotic surveyors, and what you see in the upper left-hand side are sketches that Apollo astronauts made of this phenomenon. A glowing dome, streaks of light shooting out from the lunar surface, pretty extraordinary. And then, most recently, this was my cover slide, with the Blue Ghost system, which is NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, CLPS, a wonderful public-private partnership to reach the moon. With Redwire Argus cameras, we took this image of the lunar horizon glow. What you might hear if you go on a NASA website or talk to some in the scientific community is that this effect is from dust that has been electrostatically charged and then levitated to create this impact. Now, again, I'm not saying one way or the other, but Dr. I should go back and give him credit. Dr. Manischew's direct job, I'm going to mess up his name, I apologize, it's in the slides, but a wonderful professor who's been associated with UAP's Disclosure Fund and doing work on this topic, providing me these slides. And I can tell you NASA's own research, lagging other systems, is putting some big question marks as to even if there is enough dust to create this event, which looks unlikely, and that if dust could be electrostatically charged to cause what looks like a second sunrise. And that's not the sun, by the way, it's below the horizon. That is an extraordinary image. And by the way, when I first saw this picture, I was like, is that algae on the moon? And what you're seeing is light refraction occurring due to, I don't know what. So I don't know what this is. Is it a dome? Is it some type of natural phenomena that we don't understand or aren't aware of? But I'll tell you, definitely, it's a unidentified anomalous phenomenon, which bears looking and bears understanding. And this is a good example, too, of even if it's a natural or prosaic phenomenon, there's something extraordinary occurring here. We should be delving into it. We should be studying it and understanding it. And on the off chance that it does turn out to be something extraordinary, we need to know what is occurring here. Additionally, here's another shot, publicly available from the NASA archives. You've seen some imagery of the triangular UAPs in the past. What's that? Debris? Satellites?
That's from the moon, right?
That's Apollo 17.
We had that picture.
Images from Apollo 17.
A few of us saw something like that last Friday.
Yeah. Extraordinary. Satellites, debris, Klingons. What is it? I don't know. Who do you know? Congressman? You know what that is? Why are we not investigating this? And what I would ask of our brave members of Congress who are here is, again, with relatively little effort and money, we should be leveraging AI and ML to go into the NASA archives. So much of it has been digitized, more every day, and conduct a review of what's publicly available on UAP. We spend so much time here, justifiably so, talking about classified material, what's being hidden. Yet there is a treasure trove of data that, if not a smoking gun, certainly is fascinating and worth looking at and applying the scientific method to. And these images that you're seeing here, and here's more of another UAP from Apollo, more of potentially Stonehenge, strange structures on the moon, lunar anomalies that look like Buddhist temples. And I'm not saying necessarily all of these have extraordinary explanations. Maybe some of them don't, maybe some of them do. But it certainly is worth the effort to investigate. And we're not doing that right now. Why? Because of the stigma, this pernicious stigma that prevents us from tackling it. And sir, that's where we're going to need your help. That I have many friends at NASA that are interested in this topic, fascinated by it, want to delve into it, but they need top cover. And that's why I'd be so grateful to be offline, talk more about what we can do with a new NASA administrator coming in. And this isn't going to cost a lot of money. This could be done with very little time, very little effort, yet the results could be extraordinary. Finally, as we get back to technology, I just wanted to level set relative to what it takes to travel in space. 3 days to the moon, 7 to 10 months to Mars. I can tell you exposure to radiation during that trip, quite dangerous and challenging. 77,000 years to Proxima Centauri, our closest star. That's worse than my flights on United. That's rough. And then 1.7 million years to get to where we've seen some biosignatures for the first time. We're truly going to explore space. We're going to need some innovative technology. And here we are going to spend some time discussing the Alcubierre warp drive. This was a Mexican physicist who did the initial work proving that within demonstrated science, and I would defer to Eric Davis here, but this is not extraordinary science, that a warp drive could exist. The challenge with Alcubierre's warp drive is that it would require roughly the mass of Jupiter converted into energy to operate. I had a Chevy Suburban, and that was not fuel efficient. This would be even more difficult. But a scientist at NASA, what was then NASA's EagleWorks, tweaked basically the architecture of the Alcubierre warp drive, and perhaps found some ways to get that down to more the mass of the VW, something that we could work with. So these are the kinds of technologies that if there is a gravitic system, or some kind of extraordinary technology, we must have it in order to reverse those distances and have America and our international partners lead in space exploration. Additionally, energy. I mean, if we are sitting on extraordinary technology, zero-point energy, the Casimir effect, as we discussed, think of the good we could do in terms of saving the environment, improving the economy, creating a post-scarcity society. It would be extraordinary, it would be wonderful. And let me just end by saying, the reverse of that is we do not want to fall behind China relative to leveraging extraordinary technology. I don't know if there's alien tech out there, there may be, there might not be, but can we risk falling behind the Chinese in reverse engineering if there is such technology? And this is again where the stigma is so pernicious. But I'm sure China, as its top officials, working on this 24/7, coordinated, whereas us, it's separated, it's compartmentalized, it's MIT working on it, it's Caltech working on it. No, we cannot risk losing communist China because we can't take this issue seriously. We must not let a lack of vision turn into a lack of freedom. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for the brief presentation, folks. Again, time is of the essence, so I'm going to make these as succinct as possible.
Is it okay if I present as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love you to present. I was got just questions actually about that, so please have the floor.
Well, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate, Mike, all the work you've done in microgravity, and certainly for, any of these craft that are above, that are in space above the one government, they have that access to microgravity should they choose to use it. At our firm, American Deep Tech, we're very focused on a number of areas of deep technology, including space tech, energy, and advanced bio, including one of our co-founders, Kat with Aspera. They believe they've identified a cancer kill switch, and I know you work together.
We're talking.
Yeah, it's a cancer kill switch in microgravity. So just, for pharmaceuticals, that access to microgravity, you see the aging within 9 days that it would take a year terrestrially for a tumor. So that ability to speed up that iteration on drug development is very important. So we've got some really interesting people that we work with, a CTO coming out of NASA, a branch chief coming out of Space Force, some very high growth entrepreneurs. And we also work with some leaders, as our advisors and venture partners in the UAP space, because we see the keys, of these areas of technology to drive that abundance, that competitive advantage, and just societal benefits. So people like we're fortunate to have as our advisor Hal Kutoft, and also to work with people like Julia Mossbridge and Ryan Graves and Diane Pinkhausen. So I know that they are active in so many areas of technology, but also in UAP. And so how did we come, in my former roles, which I thank you so much for that kind introduction, which I've completed my roles in the US government, where I was the co-chair alongside NASA of the US Space Economy Interagency Working Group. We worked with exceptional innovation forward, UAP forward and open leaders across the interagency, and those meetings are public, they're available online, US Space Disruptors Day. And that was a day of about 10, sometimes 12 hours of presentations on in-space biotechnology, in-space semiconductors, US launch, also UAP, also advanced consciousness, AI, communications and satellites. So there was actually interagency leadership that co-hosted this UAP leading content from NASA, Space Force, DOE, DHHS, Air Force. These were all very senior people, NSF and SBA. So while I would say that in years past, before this great movement towards transparency and gratitude for those in the room who really led that, since the 2017 timeframe and before, time has changed. And innovation is not about, unfortunately, because we want everybody to come along. We appreciate, it's great once you get beyond 50%. Innovation and science are not about consensus. We don't wait to get to 51%. This is the leaders are doing this. The fast followers are also doing this. And the reasons why they're doing this is because they're sitting in rooms, groups of people. We had an extended electrodynamics group of leaders from across the interagency and also the private sector, and they were working on advanced energy. They were working on advanced communications. They're funded entrepreneurs. At NSF Public Awards, we funded and I funded companies working on what the entrepreneurs later described as UAP adjacent or UAP inspired technologies. One of those, actually, multiple of those people have spoken, having worked on programs that they can't go into great depth about, but certainly others are undertaking that private sector research where it's not about it being classified first. And this, but the point on how do you get your communications back and forth to Mars, without dealing with the 40-minute latency? How do you do that? And what are the approaches for breaking those barriers? How do you achieve this energy abundance and that more efficient launch capability? So it was these conversations on what could be achieved and what's already been in some cases declassified in terms of work and outcomes, or was never classified, really led to conversations where we invited in experts who then said, do you want my extended electrodynamics presentation, or you want my UAP presentation? We said, we'd like both of those. And so what that led to was receiving that tremendous presentation from Hal, from Charles Chase, and from others, and saying, actually, can give this to more people. And so they gave those types of presentations to hundreds of people. And what we found with those entrepreneurs was this was the highest level of engagement we ever got in any of science or technology. I'm seeing people in the audience who are part of it shaking their heads yes. So the entrepreneurs were so eager, and scientists, to engage in the UAP science and technology. And as a frame of reference, when we talk about disruptive technology, I've worked with a few of them because I've had the opportunity to fund around 400 companies, to work with thousands of entrepreneurs. Those companies, from just a quarter billion plus put out, have gone on to raise 8.5 billion in follow-on financing and 17.5 billion in total market cap just in the early years. That's coming out of a place that the program, which is not the UAP program, but a program that has catalyzed well over $350 billion, from well less than 20, probably 12 billion put out over several decades. So these entrepreneurs, oftentimes these highest growth ones, regardless of what they're working in, it can be batteries, they're told never going to work. I mean, we all have batteries, right? People will say a higher performing battery, here's why it's not going to work. So these entrepreneurs are used to being told no and why not, and they still build things. And what's happening today, not just in America, but around the world, because the first time I saw these experiences was overseas, is people are seeing ultra advanced craft that are higher performing. And for people that are building the highest performing craft and the highest performing energy, they are not trying to unsee what they have seen, and that they've caught on a wide range of sensors. There is the classified sensors, and then there's the sensors like this. We have imagery, on our phones from going out and seeing things. So I think that the impetus to build things is what's driving this. And what would be the right levels to really go after this? This is something that a few of us have spoken about, but my background's also as a strategist. So we do a lot of strategy now. And I used to be at BCG. And the question of, if you're building the highest performing systems, what type of resources would you put in place? So if we look at, and I'm sharing kind of casually Googled numbers so we can get to better definition, but how much money went into the ISS, our long-term in-space laboratory. Some of the numbers online say that it was well over 70 billion for the US part of that, and that with other nations' contributions, it might be 150 billion. What was the cost of the Apollo program? That was 26 billion, from the 60s to the 70s. Some estimates put that at inflation adjusted well over 200, perhaps $250 billion. So if you were to ask me today, what is the right amount of money to be investing in these ultra high performing technologies, these Manhattan style projects? It's well into the hundreds of billions of dollars. That's the right answer today. Whether the US makes that investment or whether somebody else does, we are talking about advantage for multi-trillion-dollar markets. So some would say perhaps we made the right investments over time, that we've invested those tens of billions, those hundreds of billions. And if we have, how do we celebrate the accomplishments that might have come out of those programs? How do we give the recognition to those scientists, those people who have served, who perhaps have not been able to speak about their work? How do we derive value from that? How do we say these pieces that might have been constrained because you didn't have access to the tools everybody else has access to on the outside and the collaboration, how can we bring the pieces in a way that is respectful to national security and increases resilience and abundance? And I am concerned. I mean, I appreciate it. I think many of us want transparency, but also how do we make that so that the people who may have worked in this want to come forward? So if we're offering them, oh, you built something, you're given resources, and here's some punishment, that's going to be hard to get the technology out. And there's lots of ways that could be brought fully forth. It could be anonymized into a centralized clearinghouse. If there's valuable technology there that can help people in the United States and around the world, let's celebrate what's been built and let's fill the gaps that are there. So we see tremendous opportunity. The race is on. Some would say those are exceptionally large programs. Many of us have seen this wide range of phenomena, be they craft, be they orbs. The reason it matters, so sometimes the first time you see this phenomena, it's a point of interest, and you say, wow, I kind of thought there was life off planet, whether it's life off planet or advanced terrestrial technology, but you think, well, okay, interesting, now back to our day-to-day, what do we do with this? And so a number of us came to, because our core roles were advanced energy, advanced computation, advanced biology, the answer was people who are working in their core fields, biotechnology, quantum, that they're seeing some of the potential paths forward through this UAP adjacent technology. Can we classify it today? I don't know how. I mean, there are parts that we can say, stay away from this due to this risk. But the challenge on some of this is, if you're to say, well, classify UAP technology, you just got to stop working on it. For people that are familiar with the science and the technology, there are elements of this that are relevant to quantum and quantum entanglement. So what does that mean for our national posture on quantum? AI is interwoven with this. You talk about microgravity and advanced materials. So do we just not do certain layering or advancement of certain materials because they've been found in crash retrieval? We're not able to walk back because this is so interwoven. So saying that UAP is off limits, that's like saying, let's go home. Let's, maybe, can we still use fire? Maybe, let's look into it. Can you still use rocks? So many of the fields of technology would be off limits. So honestly, we don't know how to this idea, once you're in that, you don't even know, it's like saying, stop using math. So the entrepreneurs are getting inspired, they're seeing things. And so this is kind of humorous to scientists. So we both appreciate that people are talking about crash retrievals and reverse engineering. Are there crash retrievals? Well, are there crashes? I mean, there's deer retrievals where I live. I mean, a crash seems a lot more interesting than a deer to pick up. And anybody who knows an engineer says the first time you see anything of interest, you're certainly going to reverse engineer it. So whether that happens inside government programs or whether it happens out in the streets, Americans and people around the world are seeing this phenomena, and those that build things are saying, what do we build together? So we've seen these on a number of occasions. We've brought some high-ranking scientists down to folks who are able, in spots where these show up more frequently. And it's worth noting that there are people, a number of groups of people who are currently pulling in or attracting craft, and other phenomena. And some people just happen to see them. I'm looking right at you, Ron. You saw a lot of these. But so there are people that have seen these infrequently. There are people who have seen these on a day-to-day basis. When we've spoken with scientists, over the past year or two, and so this is coming out of places that some would see as the scientific establishment. And can we talk about this? Can we not? And some of these conversations hadn't taken place as openly. When they did, what we found was when we go into rooms and we talk with people who are innovators, it's usually 30 to 50% of people will share that they've seen or experienced anomalous phenomena. Sometimes they say, oh no, I haven't seen a UAP. And then they say, well, I did see this orb over a football field and, it was huge. And then, so people have seen things, and we've had to have the conversation with leaders in science where we say, by the way, times have changed. There's all this great work that's been done towards disclosure. And when we started talking to people about it, where we might have thought it was 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, seems like it's more like 1 in 3 or 2 in 3 or maybe 3 in 3 and 3 people aren't talking about it. And so we've had the conversation, which is, it is not credible or viable to act like this isn't going on. So it's a little, we use the analogy that it's a little bit like whale watching. It's both normal to, if you live by the coast only, certainly. But if you live by the coast, you have access to get on the water, there's a percentage of people who would have seen whales. There's a percentage who haven't. It's normal both ways, so nothing to feel like, special or not special, regardless, but it's ubiquitous. So if you can't go in front of a room of people, if you've seen that and it's credible, and if you haven't seen it, we say, listen, people are seeing this, they know. So to be credible, you do need to acknowledge it's out there. There's so much data, there's so much people have on their iPhones, there's so many people who will speak to the programs on the high side they're in, but the low side, is not waiting for agreement. They're not, the Fortune 1, the US government can lead this. We can try to figure out what benefit we have from the great work people in this country and perhaps around the world have done, or people are ready to move forward. And when I was in government, I used to receive proposals, without going into the details on any of them, in various fields of technology, where people think they're the only ones who can say, no. Any idea you have, believe me, dozens of people are working at the same time. So this is something that right now, both in this country and around the world, there are so many people that are eager to build this, and a number of them are already building these things up. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it isn't happening all over the place, both in this country and abroad. So if we need to lead, if we want to lead, we need to be active. So I'm looking, we always listen with respect to innovators and entrepreneurs, and I want to thank so many of you for sharing what you've seen. There is an opportunity. I expect more scientists are going to be engaging directly with the phenomena, and as scientists, they're going to be doing experiments and methods. Okay, so you want to talk about something that people talk even less about than UAPs. So the thing that was even more of a third rail than UAPs is the sources and methods for something. So as you're hearing about, there's a number of teams that are working calling this phenomena, and they're talking about all these different things. Some of them have these, ultra exotic protocols. And then one of the groups that we went to visit with some scientists, their protocol was prayer. And it was not some exotic thing, it was the Our Father, the Hail Mary, conversation. And I'm not trying to constrain it to any denomination or any faith or lack thereof, because I think one of the hesitancies people have is they want this to be for everybody and not to be specific or linked with one thing. But sources and methods, when we're talking science, there are people through meditation or very, day-by-day prayer are calling in these craft, and these orbs. So it's science. Let's talk about what it is and then assess it.
Well, thank you. So my first question actually is to you, Anna. So there was a recent statement by a government official, and it kind of went unnoticed. I think it was a few weeks ago, where they said we are now manipulating space-time. We have the ability to manipulate space-time. So I'll let that sink in for a moment. That was an official statement by a U.S. government representative. You can elaborate on that.
Well, there's certainly been publicly visible funding that has gone into that. And I'll say a couple things before I would say there's a much better expert in the audience, Dr. Julia Mossbridge, in terms of space-time work. Also, that's something that Dr. Hal Kutoff with space-time metric engineering has been very active in. So there's been plenty of work on that, and there's a lot that's going on.
So in the backdrop of that, the National Science Foundation has been a fundamental.
Oh, and sorry, just one quick thing to say. But by the way, we also, a few of us were also, maybe several of us in the room, about over a year ago, were on the National Mall at the National Academy of Sciences, where it was National Space Week. And there were some presenters from around the world, and that also included a representative from the Chinese government, presumably the CCP. And the presentation that they were putting up included requests for, we want to work with people on, I believe it was space-time metric engineering, it was gravitational control, and it was also alien life off planet, amongst other things like renewables. So the Chinese are literally coming down to the National Mall and saying, hi, come talk to us about this. You know, and so, come on, seriously? Another thing that they said, by the way, you know, in terms of many of us have been advocating for much higher levels of capital to go into innovation and also into in-space infrastructure, which does not have access to the terrestrial financial tools like debt. You know, so if you buy a house, most people, they're making a smaller down payment, 20%, 5%, whatever they can do, more of a minimum. In space, it's typically, you've got to front all of the money up front. You're not going to build a hospital for the individual patient. You need to have the financial model. So anyways, when I was trying to figure out what was the space budget for China, they wouldn't tell me. But the gentleman did look at me in disdain. You know, he's talking to all of you. He said, when we look at putting up a space station, we view that, does that cost the same amount of money as putting down a couple of kilometers of metro? Basically, we're going to do that all day, every day. So if we can't figure out how to make the investments to win in these transformational markets for abundance, for societal benefits, and for economic growth and gain, we're going to be left behind. So so the people that are moving forward. We really hope that the U.S. government, Fortune 1, you know, is able to share some of the great work that's been done, you know, previously across all these fields, but the private sector is moving forward.
Folks, we're going to have time for only two very quick questions. We're already way over our time, and we have to unfortunately surrender this room back over to folks. So let me finish. I've got two here, and then afterwards, if you want to get with our guests, you can. We're not going to have time to open it up right now for public questions, but I have, let me get to this real quick. And if we could, our guests could please keep the answer as succinct as possible before we actually get kicked out of the room. Let me start with you, Anna. The National Science Foundation has been a fundamental pillar of some of America's revolutionary technology and concepts for many decades. How can the NSF help the government now concerning the topic of UAPs?
Well, I guess one of the things that's just publicly visible is that we have been, when I was formerly at NSF, I would just say that there's lots of publicly visible content of us being very forward on the topic, listening to innovators, working with strong colleagues from across the interagency. So I think that NSF has shown, and NSF leadership has also just been extremely supportive. So I just want to be very clear. I left the government because I'm excited about building things in the private sector, and I've only ever received the greatest support and collaboration from my interagency colleagues and from the agencies with which I worked. who are extremely forward on all areas of innovation, but certainly UAP fits within that, including our publicly visible awards that were made to fund UAP science. There's great people that are highly supportive, particularly over there.
Excellent, very encouraging, thank you. Mike, last question. You were on the NASA UAP independent study team. My question for you is, what were the recommendations of the NASA UAP independent study team, and how should those recommendations be implemented?
For the purpose of time, Lou, thank you for that question. I'll focus on two of those recommendations. We already discussed going through the NASA archives with an AI ML system to get the data, just a few examples of which we were able to show today, again, which could be quite extraordinary. Candidly, I think there are companies that would even volunteer to do that work for NASA. But the second one, and I really appreciate you showing that photo, which was taken by a commercial pilot. And one of the great disappointments I had when I was on the UAP independent study team was I was asking the FAA, how many reports have you gotten from commercial pilots? Are those reports being archived? How are we keeping track of that? And I got confusion and no straight answers. And here I'd like to give credit to Brian Graves again for suggesting that we leverage NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System, ASRS, which has been operating for decades, has hundreds of thousands of cases. And this is a confidential system where pilots, crew can call in about safety anomalies that they've experienced. It's worked phenomenally well. We should be leveraging this system for the reporting of UAP. It can be done quickly, it could be done efficiently, and the amount of data that we will receive would be amazing. Additionally, the images that I showed you was from the Commercial and Payload Services Program. Public-private partnerships have driven all of this. I'm so excited for the democratization of space and the data that we will get from that. This was just one example today. As SpaceX, Blue Origin, Redwire, other companies move forward, all with their own cameras, all with their own systems, we're going to get a lot more data. But NASA still holds on to a lot of it. So, for example, with what I presented, we need the raw data. We need timestamps. We need data in a format that we can do true academic research. So if we were just to do those two things, and again, we can use support from Congress, I think, to push that, I think NASA could play a tremendously important role, and particularly the aviation community and the commercial space community. The amount of data we get, I think, will completely shift the level of sophistication on this topic.
And I think there's also probably about 20 or 30 hours of some of that forward interagency content in the Space Disruptors Day and the Ecosystemic Futures podcast, which we have Diane in the room here today. So thank you, Diane, for helping get that information out broadly.
I do have to say, though, I'm a little less optimistic than Hannah relative to the adoption in government. As I said during my testimony, that particularly academic members of the NASA UAP independent study team were threatened, outright threatened. Not for saying UAP are real, but for just having the temerity of even reviewing the topic. You can't do science in that environment. And part of the reason that I'm calling for Congress to help is there's still a great deal of skepticism, even just at NASA, and careers that get ended just for having, again, the temerity of the research for it. So I think it's incumbent of all of us to push for real science, objective science, overcome that stigma. Let's get to the data, because our economy and our national security may be depending on it.
And I think you contributed so much. So what I would say is some of the things that you experience, or that Lou, and Chris and others experience, there's that body of having been able to point to those leaders. So we had the advantage of being able to point to your study, into this prior work. So, and again, I think there's the opportunity for the government, but I would say that it's not, there are industries that move forward that are not forwarded by the government. But I think just to be something very important that came out, because sometimes if we say, oh, UAP this, UAP that, there's going to be some great technologies that come out of that. That is very fluffy, and who cares? So I think something that I got briefed on in an unclassified, just informal, no classification level environment, and both in personal capacity, but then I later brought that person in to brief others in the agency. Is there real and meaningful technologies that have come from these programs? And I think with a lot of this information, you're going to see that, you know, the story about it has been in the internet for decades, perhaps. So what I have, though, on from a very credible source was that, yes, there are people who say that this came out of the UAP programs, when we talk about lasers and semiconductors. And that was so important. You know, semiconductors, the top 10 companies today, a $6.5 trillion industry that we all benefit from and underpins our global economy. That is something that it's not just, oh, maybe we'll get something. It's that there are tremendous people who have built things, you know, both in classified and unclassified environments. And that's been, you know, put out by so many authors and people in the news, but some ones are in environments that we can say this is taken seriously, and those people have told the government that yes, there's been real advantage on some of these most important core technologies from coming from crash retrievals.
And I think to get the government to take it seriously, we need to engage the public. We've got to get outside the UAP bubble. And Dan Farrow did a tremendous movie, Age of Disclosure. It's really a blue story in many ways. It's extraordinary. Himself and Jay Stratton. If we can touch the public, if we can get them engaged, if we can get them the same information that we just saw, I think that would be completely transformative.
Well, since time is of the essence, first of all, thank you sincerely for your participation. It was a fantastic conversation. Let me leave a couple thoughts here, if I may, before we say final farewell. One of the recommendations we made to Congress is the generation of a national intelligence strategy that would be promulgated on an annual basis, just like we do for other of our targets. It's a system that we have perfected already. And then right on the heels of that, a national strategy every year, annual strategy on UAP drone. Basically, any unattributed objects that are in our skies, we should have a strategy for it. Because we're seeing both on the combat field and even in the streets of New York, we're seeing technologies that we can't really explain, and frankly could be used against us in a very nefarious way if we don't get a handle on it. Two, what I'd like to do is propose, and hopefully Congress at some point will be able to do this, that we should do a forum like this every year for the American public and for the media, and allow Congress to get to the bottom of things and ask the questions that they normally wouldn't be able to ask, and bring in the Department of Justice and the Intelligence Community, the Department of Defense, and bring them all here, why not? Right, sitting down here in front of American people, by the way I look at it, you're paying their paychecks anyways. Right? You kind of owe you some answers, and they owe Congress some answers. I would also say, please let your members of Congress know that you support this. If you like what Representative Burleson and Representative Luna and Burchett and others have done here today, let them know, right? They need to hear this. And so other members of Congress can see this and say, hey, that works, right? Tell them that. They need to hear that feedback, unless you don't want what you say. But that would be my suggestion. Last but not least, I want to thank specifically our members of Congress, because at the end of the day, they're your representatives. They represent this country. They are very much part of this country. And they are the reasons why you are all here today and we are here. They have facilitated this, they have sponsored this, they have gone out of their way to put their political careers potentially in jeopardy for even having this conversation for you. So if you appreciate this, let them know. Last but not least, thank you to every one of you. Again, our friends in the media, the folks that came over here, some cases came from across the world and traveled here very long distances to be with us here today. Thank you very much. It's very meaningful, and we're all here because it's been a group effort. So with that said, let's give a round of applause to our guests here. And a huge round of applause for what those who do stuff. We are happy to have you in the group. So no further ado, this meeting is now.
And that was it. I guess some interesting things there from Gold and the other witness. I've been constantly searching for a possible location of this photo that Elizondo held up. again, in case you missed it on our Twitter at @ATUnexplained, we kind of got to the bottom of the code at the top, the FL210 near four corners. This probably stands for flight level 210, which would be 21,000 feet. So the object was either at 21,000 feet or the platform that took the photo was at 21,000 feet. And then near four corners, this is most likely referring to the Four Corners area where New Mexico borders 3 other states. So I've been looking. There's some interesting potential matches. I just found a potential matchup of some shapes. What is interesting about the matchup, I just found it doesn't have a circle on there or 2 circles. So there are some on Twitter speculating that the photograph could be nothing more than filled circles or filled crops. So not a shadow. And there are photos online that show circular dark patches and circular lighter patches of crop fields. And it certainly could be misinterpreted as an object casting a shadow. And there's some online that says the shadow's all wrong and everything. I don't know about that. But interestingly, Gold himself just said, hey, I appreciate you showing that photo from a commercial pilot. You would think that someone with Gold's expertise, or the lady next to him, Estevez, I think, you would think if that photo set off alarm bells or red flags that they would have picked up on it. But Gold doubled down and said, hey, I appreciate you showing that photo from a commercial pilot. So very interesting there. We'll try to come back on another time. Maybe you can catch me in some Twitter spaces going over some analysis and further thoughts. Until then, I've got sand volleyball tonight, and I'll have to pick some kids up from school. And this has been a long day of listening to some UFO stuff. So very interesting. Thanks to everybody for joining us from all over the world. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. If you're watching us on YouTube, we're at All Things Unexplained. You know, Vetted Podcast, our friends at Vetted, they just picked up one of our tweets recently on Roswell, a Roswell revelation that we picked up from the National Archives release. And they kind of based an episode of their podcast off our tweet about Roswell and some audio that we found in the National Archives. So check that out. Give us a follow on Twitter if you will. If you'd like to support the show, you can also check out our YouTube store. We've got super chat, super stickers, super thanks available, and check out our website at allthingsunexplained.com. I am Dr. Mounce. This is All Things Unexplained. I want to encourage each of you to get off your screens now for a little while. Head outside, get some fresh air, get some sunshine. Get out to the woods. Watch the sky for yourselves. Don't count on other people to tell you what's out there. You might not find Bigfoot. You might not find a UFO. But you might find something even more important out there. You might just find yourself. Thanks, everybody.
All Things Unexplained.
What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
So some of that, I think, sir, will save for closed session.